And rather than giving up this rendezvous, I made appeal to my small dose of resilience, and here I am. And I am delighted, Mr. Commissioner, after your opening words, to pay tribute to what you personally and this Commission have been doing to foster the part of European integration which is future-oriented and looking into future generations. I've always been convinced that Europe is the best ally, the best friend of new and future generations. If we take climate change, well, it was the European Union which, before anybody else, and sometimes isolated, pushed this battle forward. But also if we take that awkward subject in many of our countries, which is fiscal discipline, which seems against youth and the future, far from it. If we want to avoid that young Europeans and future generations of Europeans be born with their little shoulders already charged by an unbearable public debt, which will limit their ability to enjoy life and quality of life in the future, then we must say that for all the unpleasant words that often we as national politicians may address to Brussels, the youth has to be grateful to the European Union. This year, as you know, in Italy, but also across the world, we are celebrating the genius of Leonardo da Vinci 500 years after his death. I recently found a quote from Leonardo that I would like to share with you today because it is centered around the relationship between the teacher and the pupil. Said Leonardo, "Poor is the pupil who does not surpass his master." In current times, probably it works even better the other way around. Poor is the master who was not surpassed by any of his or her pupils. However you spin it, this quote unveils one of the secrets of the educational process, and particularly the relationship between teachers and students, which is, on one side, the willingness to transfer knowledge, passion, and experience, and on the other side, the desire to learn, grow, become a better person, and do something meaningful in your life. I believe that many of the teachers attending this event today do understand what I mean. It happened several times to me as a university professor, and it was such a rewarding acknowledgement for my job to be surpassed by pupils. Think about how many times in your own direct professional experience students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds have made it. They found a better job or attained a higher level of education than their parents. Education is a key driver of social mobility, and the role of teachers in this sense is of paramount importance, not only for the benefit of the disadvantaged students themselves, but also to raise awareness among classmates that although inequalities do exist, they can be overcome. And we all can play a part in the process of leveling opportunities and thus increase equality. Today we will discuss about education in Europe. Let me spend a couple of minutes on the European Union, which has sailed through difficult months lately, but troubled water seems left behind. Although I would suggest all your future colleagues, Mr. Commissioner, not to have just not even 1 minute of complacency, because unless much more is done, then the threat that was overcome at the last elections will present itself again. So, but about teachers and the European Union, you know, because it has been said that I was commissioner for 10 years, but much before that, as a part of my own educational process, I spent 4 months in Brussels, way back in the last century, as a stagiaire at the European Commission. And I must say that teachers can play sometimes a slightly ambivalent, but at any rate a creative role, because my professor, my thesis supervisor, was totally in favor when I asked him whether it would make sense for me to try and have a period in Brussels at the European Commission, with then 6 member states. And he said yes, and he encouraged me very much. So after these 4 months, I went back to him to ask for advice on the thesis, but he welcomed me with a moderate smile and asked me, "But Monti, are you sure you really want to do a thesis on European integration?" So that was not the most encouraging feedback that he could have given me, but then he helped me a lot, and here we are. In her speech before the European Parliament, the President-elect of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has mentioned the topic of education several times. I would like to highlight in particular her reference to social inclusion through the creation of the European Child Guarantee, a tool that, I quote, will help ensure that every child in Europe at risk of poverty or social exclusion has access to the most basic of rights like healthcare and education. Moreover, she committed to making the European education area a reality by 2025 and to support the European Parliament's idea to triple the Erasmus Plus budget as part of the next long-term budget. In my opinion, this is excellent news for Europe, since Erasmus is unanimously recognized as one of the great success stories of the Union, and of course it has to do with education. But President von der Leyen also mentioned another key topic for the future of education, which is the impact of digital transformation and the need for everyone to become digitally literate. This revolution has already had and will have much more in the future a profound impact on the teaching profession at all possible levels. Teaching and learning methods from kindergarten to university and to continuing education will in fact be deeply reshaped. It's a big challenge for all of us, and I do hope in Europe we could lead the way to making the most of innovation, but at the same time to preserve our own values, human dignity, human rights, freedom, democracy, equality, and rule of law. The supply of all these important things in life is not increasing outside of Europe these days. If we believe that education is more than knowledge transfer, if we aspire to share the common guidelines of a European educational model, preserving, however, the specific framework of each member state's educational system, and working together with national and regional authorities, then we should include more and more the European values in what and how, I would say, we teach our students. These values can strongly affect the overall sense of purpose and accountability of future generations. They are, in fact, the building blocks of a society in which inclusion, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and non-discrimination prevail. After all, you, teacher, shape up future participants to the job market, but you even more importantly, shape up future citizens of our society. Yet we need to do more. We need to do more to tackle the migration challenge and make it compatible with human rights and human dignity. We need to do much more to protect climate as a common good, keeping in mind that it isn't just about technological solutions, but as Pope Francis so clearly pointed out in his encyclical letter Laudato Si, we are also faced with an educational environmental challenge, which, I quote, needs educators capable of developing an ethics of ecology and helping people through effective pedagogy to grow in solidarity, responsibility, and compassionate care. What a spectacular glue for European integration. I would like to conclude these remarks mentioning three positive examples, I believe, of European integration. The first one may seem to be outside of education and is called competition policy. It's not very much outside of education because instilling and enforcing the principles of equality of rights also in economic life and of repressing behavior by large companies which is either discriminatory or abusive or cashing in monopoly rents to the detriment of smaller enterprises and of ordinary citizens is really a part of enforcing education. But I want to mention it also because it's not that Europe works or Europe doesn't work. There are specific areas where Europe is top class in what it does. They tend to be, not by chance, the areas where member states willingly, over time, have decided, with all the necessary controls and accompanying measures, to give some power to the center in order for these matters to be dealt with coherently and seriously. And competition policy is one area where, since the Treaty of Rome, that is done. But also in a field which is very close to yours, research, this is done. Because if you take the European Research Council, to which I had the opportunity to become closer as Commissioner Moedas asked me some time ago to chair a selection committee to propose to him a short list of names from which the future president of the European Research Council has been selected. Well, the European Research Council is really a federal entity in itself because the evaluations are made by a body which is a community body, untouched by considerations other than merit. And you probably know that there are many, many non-EU countries in Europe and elsewhere which submit their projects in the field of research to the ERC, knowing perfectly that they are not going to be financed because they are not from the EU, but simply to borrow the ability to evaluate and then for those countries to decide whether to finance or not those projects. And I must say the issue of the nominations of portfolios and competences is quite touchy at this time. I admire, I must say honestly, the overall approach that the President-elect has taken. I hope that over time it will be made more and more clear that because a portfolio is labeled innovation and youth, this does not imply in the least that there will be a downgrading of research in particular, which would be like giving up something that Europe has achieved so marvelously. And the third example is the example of European universities that the Commissioner mentioned and on which he has been fighting so hard and so successfully. You will have the opportunity to focus on European university in one of the sessions in the afternoon. and to learn much more, which I encourage you to do. And you know the proposal, and I know that the proposal and the beginning of the implementation, in my view, this is an incredible opportunity to make a further step forward in the process of European integration through a framework of transnational cooperation among institutions such as universities that were conceived and created in the heart of Europe and have been part of our cultural footprint as knowledge powerhouses for more than a millennium. And the university for which I am responsible in Milan has been an enthusiastic initial participant already to this project. So yours is the most important profession in the world, much more than politicians. I dare say even of European politicians, where my heart has remained attached, as you might notice. And so I wish you all success for you, for your students, for future generations, and I associate myself to the words of the Commissioner, best success for this occasion here in Brussels today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this fascinating speech. Thank you very much indeed. No matter what difficulties you face in life, you can still do extraordinary things. Now, that's the powerful message of our next speaker. In the 1990s, Christoph Schiebold was still a student when he learned he was suffering from multiple sclerosis. But as you'll hear, the disease was no excuse for Christoph to give up on his dreams. One of them, becoming a teacher. At 42, he's become a role model at the International Montessori School of Brussels, where he teaches mathematics and geography. Earlier this year, Christoph was nominated for the prestigious Global Teacher Prize. Christoph, welcome, and now it's your time to teach us a lesson.